Chapter 17, Treatment of Psychological Disorders. So in this chapter, we are going to look over the various types of therapies, psychotherapies that are offered to help people with psychological disorders. Namely, we're going to look at the psychodynamic perspective, the humanistic perspective, cognitive perspective, and behavioral perspective. And then look a bit at this third wave cognitive behavioral therapies, some new approaches that have come up recently. But first, we're going to look at the helping relationship. That is the key ingredient to any type of therapy. In order to have successful therapy, you need to start with a base, which is a solid, positive, helping relationship. The goal of treatment, of course, is to help change maladaptive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors so that people can live happier, more productive lives. The helping relationship between the client and the helper, it is the key ingredient, as I stated before, to treatments depending on the perspective they're coming from, and those treatments range from psychological to biomedical perspectives, which we're going to look at. Oftentimes people do not go to counseling first or psychologists first. Often they go to their family doctor, or they turn to friends or family, or say like then finally the family doctor will usually do a referral to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or referral to a social work, and then the person can get a different type of therapy with them. So as I've stated a couple of times, the relationship between the client and the therapist is the most important foundation of the therapy, and helps determine what the how successful the outcome is going to be. So each type of therapist, whether it's the cognitive or behavioral or humanistic, they're going to apply their counseling techniques, right, as dictated by their approach to treatment. But in all cases, it's the quality of the relationship, the therapeutic technique used, and then, of course, the client's commitment to change. That is all going to influence the outcome, whether it's a successful outcome or not. This figure outlines the four main therapies for psychological disorders, namely psychodynamic perspectives, humanistic, cognitive, and behavioral. Lastly, it does touch on biological. That section's a little smaller. So across these 17 chapters that we've been doing together, I think you've come to really understand the differences between the approaches, right? Psychodynamic, as usual, is Freud with his psychoanalysis, and talk a little bit about the psychodynamic therapies. Secondly is the humanistic perspectives, which mainly is client-centered therapy, associated with Rogers, and Gestalt therapy, associated with Paris. Next, we have cognitive therapies, which include rational and motive therapy by Ellis, cognitive therapy Beck, and then mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral treatments. And then lastly, behavioral therapies, which of course can include classical conditioning therapies, and operant conditioning and modeling, the three main aspects of behavioral. Okay, so let's jump in then. So the first one we're going to look at here is psychodynamic, with Freud and his psychodynamic approaches. Psychoanalysis. So psychodynamic approaches to psychotherapy focus, of course, on the internal conflict and unconscious battles and demons and chaos that we have within us that underlie maladaptive behavior, right? So based on all of these Freudian principles, the goal of psychodynamic therapy is to help patients achieve insight, right? So insight is conscious awareness of these psychodynamics, of these underlying problems, of this chaos, adjust behavior underlying problems learned in childhood. So these problems that came up in childhood, his therapy involves different ways of helping you become more aware of these um, conflicts so that you can understand them, and then they're going to come into your awareness and then go away. So a couple of ways, or 4 ways, I believe we're going to discuss this, is the first is free association. So clues to the unconscious can be found in the constant stream of thoughts, memories, images, and feelings. So you have this constant stream of this mental activity that's going on, right? And clues to the conflict that's underlying your maladaptive behavior can be found in this free-flowing stream. So in free association, the therapist, you're lying there, the therapist will say different things to you, a different word, and you just say the first thing that comes to your mind. And that's going to help identify areas to probe into further. Providing clues is what they're saying. The words that you come up with are going to provide clues to what the chaos is. Dream interpretation, I'm sure you've all heard of that. Therapists help the clients understand the symbolic meaning of their dreams. The dreams express impulses, fantasies, wishes in the unconsciousness. All of these things in your consciousness are going to come out through your dreams in different ways. Why is there a sunset going here with a horse or a unicorn running across it? I don't know. But you talk about your dreams and things that come up, and those are also clues to the chaos that's going on within you. Other concepts that come up, resistance, maladaptive avoidance patterns, defensive maneuvers that hinder the process of therapy, and signs that anxiety arousing material is being approached. So when the client is resistant to something in the therapy, right? Whether they're resistance, they don't want to talk about it, they try to talk around it, they avoid it, any sort of defensive maneuvers, those are all considered signs that you're getting close to what the problem is. Transference, that's when the client responds irrationally to the therapist, as though the therapist was an important figure from that person's past, right? The therapist brings out repressed feelings and maladaptive behaviors, must analyze and resolve transference to get the source of the problem. So if the person becomes angry with the therapist or starts saying different things to the therapist, the idea is like, okay, so why is this coming up? What is bringing this about? This anger or whatever the feelings are. 2 types of transference. There's positive, where you're feelings of attraction, dependency, of love, right? Strong positive feelings towards the therapist. The other type of transference is negative, where you're going to have irrational expressions of anger, hatred, or disappointment. But either one of these, in either one of these situations, the transference is the client transferring or extending the feelings that they have within onto the therapist, and that is the source of information, like it's giving clues as to what to look for. Interpretation, statements by the therapist to provide the client with insight into their behavior. It confronts clients with something they have not previously admitted into consciousness. Okay, and then psychoanalysis, I was just talking about like how it's expensive and time consuming. So the thing with psychoanalysis is that in all cases in the therapy that you're doing, the point is that the client arrives at insight or awareness of their own behavior. It can't be rushed along. They need to come to awareness on their own, in a sense. So it can be very time consuming and expensive. So what they've come up with more recently is brief psychodynamic therapies. They are briefer, that's a word, more economical. So the focus on brief psychodynamic therapies is on maladaptive past influences, and they use psychoanalytic concepts and therapies, but in a more focused and active fashion. Sorry, I'm not speaking properly now. Interpersonal therapy focuses on the client's current relationships with important people in their lives. So this figure shows a graph of improvements found through psychodynamic therapy. Okay, so traditional psychodynamic therapy, what they did was they tracked the decrease in psychological symptoms across the number of sessions seen in psychotherapy. And what they found was the highest rate of improvement is seen right at the beginning. You can see it goes from 70 symptoms all the way down to still 53 symptoms. The biggest drop here, and then it sort of planes out, right? So what they're saying is that the most improvements found in psychodynamic therapy is found within the first 10 sessions. So the brief psychodynamic therapies here, they tend to focus on, they're more focused, they're more active, and they take advantage of the fact that most of the success is within the first 10 sessions instead of having it carry on for 20 sessions, 2 years, 3 years. Okay, so that's it for psychodynamic therapies. Now we're going to move on to humanistic therapy, psychotherapies. The relationship is very different in the humanistic psychotherapies from this in this perspective. And the approach is very different too. So humanistic approaches view humans as capable of consciously controlling their actions and taking responsibility for their choices and behavior, as opposed to psychodynamic, where our behavior is the result of the chaos within us. Okay, humanistic views humans as capable of consciously controlling your actions. You're very aware. You possess inner reinforcers for self-healing. Disordered behavior is a function of distorted perceptions, lack of awareness, and negative self-image. It's all about your thinking, right? Distorted ways of thinking, distorted self-awareness about, and negative self-image, just all about the way you think about yourself, and think about the things around you and situations and the environment. Humanistic psychotherapy, it is seen that the treatment is seen as a human encounter between equals. So the client is an equal of the therapist. The therapist creates an environment for self-exploration and removes all the barriers for this. Barriers are a result of childhood experiences resulting in maladaptive standards of self-worth. So the focus is on the present and the future, not the past. Okay, so while the barriers may be a result of childhood experiences, they're not saying that your childhood didn't have any impact on you, but they're not examining your past. They're examining your present thoughts, your thoughts about the future. It's about your present awareness. And it can be about your present awareness of things that happened before, but the focus is on now. One of the key figures in humanistic psychology and psychotherapy is Carl Rogers, right? And his focus was on the therapeutic environment. So I've got a quote there. Psychotherapy is the releasing of an already existing capacity in a potentially competent individual, not the expert manipulation of a more or less passive personality. So what they're trying to do is release, they believe that the person is already complete and whole and completely competent to take care of their own feelings and awareness. Is just helping guide them to do that. So client-centered therapy is the most widely used form of humanistic therapy, also known as person-centered. The relationship is the most important. Constructive therapeutic relationship equals increased self-acceptance, self-awareness, and improved life functioning. And because this relationship is so important, there are three important and interrelated therapist attributes. So the humanistic psychologist, the person who's engaged in this form of therapy, must have unconditional positive regard for their clients, which means accepting the clients without judgment or evaluation. Empathy, they have to be able to view the world through the client's eyes. And then thirdly, genuineness, consistently between the therapist's feelings and behaviors. Okay, the second humanistic psychotherapy that's outlined is Gestalt therapy by Pearl. Gestalt means the organized whole. So the goal of Gestalt therapy is bringing feelings, wishings, and thoughtness into awareness, so making the client whole again. Methods, it's often carried out in groups. It's more active and dramatic than client-centered approaches. They do a lot of different things like role-playing, imaginative techniques like empty chair technique, which you can read about. Empty chair technique, page 666. So it's been found to be a fairly successful approach to therapy. So the empty chair technique is when the client, they have a chair there, and let's say that the issue is between the client and their mother. So the client can just imagine that their mother is sitting in the chair, and then they talk to their mother, and it's like an imaginative role play, right? And then at the same time, or sorry, not the same time, after they'll switch spots and they imagine they're in the chair and then what their mother might be saying to them. So it's a way of bringing all of these, feelings and thoughts into awareness by engaging in role play. Okay, so fourth section, cognitive therapies. So we've talked about psychodynamic therapies, we've talked about humanistic therapies, and the next one is cognitive therapies. Cognitive approaches to psychotherapy focus on the role of irrational and self-defeating thought patterns, right? So the way you think about yourself, the way you think about the world, often people that are having psychological difficulties think about things in maladaptive ways, in ways that are unhealthy, and these thought patterns can lead to depression and to other difficulties. So again, the idea, the drive behind cognitive therapies is to help clients discover and change their cognitions, help them become more aware of the thoughts that they're having and how those thoughts contribute to the problems that they're having, and how changing those thoughts can be helpful. So the key figures in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm sure you've heard before, is Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis. The focus is the role of irrational and self-defeating thought patterns, help clients discover and change cognitions that underlie these problems. Often thought patterns can become a habit. You see them as, you have this thought and you think that it's real and you think that that's reality. And what they can help do is help you realize that sometimes these patterns are a habit and you interpret them as reality, but they're actually not. And you learn to challenge these thought patterns, right? So it helps clients identify beliefs, ideas, self-statements, anything like that trigger maladaptive emotions and behaviors, and teaches them how to challenge them. Also, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Rational emotive therapy by Ellis. Similar to CBT, the theory of emotional disturbance and the ABCD model. Okay. So in this, the A is the activating environmental event. So something happens. After something happens, the event activates certain beliefs, right? Often by habit. These beliefs, the result is emotional and behavioral consequences of B, which typically are negative, right? So in RET, you focus on D here, disputing or challenging these maladaptive emotions and behaviors. So you're going to go back and you're going to be challenging the beliefs that come out, that are activated, by the event. Beck's cognitive therapy, the second, focuses on irrational beliefs, right? Ideas underlying the maladaptive response, point out errors of thinking, help the clients identify and reprogram automated thought patterns. Help clients realize that thoughts, not situation, causes their maladaptive emotional reactions. Cognitive behavioral therapies are the psychological treatment choice for depression. Lots of research has been done on this and found it to be the most successful treatment for depression. Neuroscience of treating depression. So research has shown that maladaptive thoughts and depression are related to lower levels of serotonin in the brain. Sorry, I'm having a tech issue here. So what I was saying was, so maladaptive behaviors, thoughts, whatnot, people with depression have been found to have low levels of serotonin in the brain. And what they have found is that when patients or clients, go under cognitive behavioral therapy, they do find changes in brain function, most notably in the limbic system and the cortex. And they found that compared to a control group that did not undergo CBT. So lastly, we have the behavioral therapies. Behavioral therapies emerged in the 1960s, and as you remember, with Pavlov and the dog and operant conditioning and classical conditioning, behavioral therapies, behavioral approaches all come from the perspective of behaviors being learned, right? Behavioral therapies, they assert that maladaptive behaviors are not the are the problem, not a symptom. Behaviors are learned, therefore they can be unlearned. In two ways: classical conditioning treatments or operant conditioning treatments. So classical conditioning treatments are used in two major ways. One is to decondition or reduce responses, or condition new responses to a particular stimuli. So, for example, with that one, as this has here, you can actually condition new anxiety responses, say, to alcohol. Have the person learn a new association that works to decrease the behavior and drink less. So the most commonly used classical conditioning procedures include exposure and systematic desensitization. So let's go back here. Exposure, also known as extinction. So that's used to treat phobias through the exposure of the feared CS in the absence of UCS, right? So you become, if you've got a phobia of, I don't know, fear of needles. Sorry, I had to think of something. Okay, fear of needles. So what you want to do if you're going to be doing extinction is have a needle somehow in your presence in the absence of the unconditioned response, which is intense fear for me. Okay? So I'm not likely going to be able to have a nurse walk up with a needle and have the absence of my fear. That's not going to happen. So you're not going to start there. You can maybe start with deep meditation. Okay, and I'm going to think of a needle. And I'm going to be meditating, and now I can think of the needle without the fear response. Okay, and when I've done that enough times, I don't know, maybe there's a needle sitting on the table across the room. although that still is eliciting a fear response. So back to meditation. The point is that you're trying to disassociate the conditioned stimulus with the UCS. So as you meditate and be more calm, now the needle is on the table, it's not bothering me anymore. Maybe it's a little closer. I'm able to have it closer without the fear. And eventually you're overcoming and you're extinguishing the association. Okay. Flooding involves exposure to real life stimuli, like having those feared CSs right there in front of your face. Whereas implosion, that involves imagining the scene. So you can do both, right? You can imagine the needle at first, and then you can actually have it present. So the two different types there. Systematic desensitization, learning-based treatment for anxiety disorders, right? Eliminate anxiety through counter-conditioning. So steps. Train muscle relaxation skills. Anxiety and relaxation cannot coexist. Stimulus hierarchy, low anxiety to high anxiety scenes. I think this is best if you take a look in the textbook because it's got so many little steps there that it's easier for you to go through and take a look at the systematic desensitization, also known as counter conditioning. In vivo desensitization, lastly, controlled exposure to real life situations creates more anxiety during treatment than systematic desensitization. Anxiety may reduce more quickly though. So a little bit more intense, but maybe better and faster at reducing the anxiety. Aversion therapy, another sort. Condition an aversion to a CS, like alcohol. So in aversion therapy, you are pairing a CS to a UCS for the purpose of teaching aversion, okay? So they use that often people with sexual disorders or with alcohol, but this one's with sexual disorders. So classical conditioning, it occurs in aversion therapy, the treatment of pedophile who receives an electric shock when pictures of children are presented. So the goal of the treatment is the development of conditioned anxiety, which reduces the sexual attractiveness of children. Operant conditioning, behavior modification treatments. So use positive reinforcement, extinction, negative reinforcement, or punishment, right? So attempt to increase or reduce behavior. So as you remember in operant conditioning, the difference between operant and classical is that in operant, the client or the person, they do a behavior, right? Elicit a behavior, and then the consequence of that behavior either increases it or decreases it, right? Whether they're rewarded or punishment or all of these things. Operant conditioning treatments have found to be successful when traditional therapies are difficult to implement. Okay, so one example they talk about in the text is token economies. These are often used in, say, classrooms. It's taught actually in the behavior management section in educational psychology. Talk about so token economies. It's a system for strengthening desired behavior through the application of positive reinforcement. Tokens are given for desirable behaviors, and tokens exchange for tangible reinforcers. So instead of simply just giving a star or for good homework or giving praise, which is positive reinforcement, token economies, each time, say, students engaged in positive behavior, they're given tokens, and then after they can save up those tokens and they can use those tokens to, in exchange, say for a reinforcer, a reward that they enjoy, right? The goal is to achieve desired behaviors with these reinforcements. In the hopes, the point of this is, so let's say that they're reinforcing for behaving well in class. So the student sits at their desk and studies and does their seat work. So they're being rewarded. They're given a token because they sat still for 20 minutes and did their work. They're raising their hand in class instead of just yelling out, so they receive a token for that. So they receive tokens for different positive behaviors that they do, and at the end of the day or at the end of the week, probably a short term, they're able to trade those tokens in for some sort of reward, movie time, some sort of special activity outside. The point of this is not that they continue to work for reinforcers or tokens. The point is that as they're doing this, their different behavior is being reinforced socially. They're getting social reinforcements, pride, what's the word I'm looking for? Appreciation, acknowledgement from other students, acknowledgements from the teachers that they're behaving well. So the idea is that that will take over and soon you won't need the tokens. Use of punishment. Generally, punishment is the last thing you ever want to do. It has been found to be the least effective treatment. So in the use of punishment, if you feel that that's the last way to go, ask yourself 2 questions first. Are there alternative, less painful approaches? Is behavior to be eliminated sufficiently injurious to justify punishment severity? Never employ punishment without the consent of the client or the client's legal guardian. There has been found to be some success using punishment in behavior therapies with severely disturbed or self-destructive children. And lastly, in behavior therapies, modeling and social skills. Social skills training, looking at the modeling approach, the learning of new skills by observing and imitating a model who performs a socially skilled behavior. Right? The key factors in social skills training, they include increased self-efficacy. They have to believe they can do it, right? You have to believe you can succeed at it. And the key factor is watching somebody else do something and the belief that you can do that too. Okay, so that is the end of let me zoom back here. We talked about the helping relationship. Then we talked about the 4 main approaches: psychodynamic, humanistic, cognitive, and behavioral therapies. Okay, they're the main ones. The next section is going to get into the 3rd wave, which sort of blends cognitive and behavioral therapies together. The rest of the chapter gets into cultural and gender issues, evaluating the different psychotherapies, and it briefly talks about biological approaches and then psychological disorders in society. We are at 33 minutes, approaching 34, so I'm going to stop the video here.